East Tampa has a vast and vibrant history. The area was established through a series of incorporations from 1911 to 1953 and has always been a majority African American community due to redlining, segregation, and environmental concerns. Redlining was a racist and discriminatory practice that started in the 1930s, grading neighborhoods partly based on race and class for the purpose of home financing. East Tampa was given the lowest grade of D, labeled as, quote, hazardous with an undesirable population. This led to the isolation and concentration of people of color in urban spaces and inadequate housing infrastructure. The legacy of redlining can still be felt in this community today.
So that's why black people were allowed to live there. Because with all this standing water, breeding mosquitoes who carried yellow fever, whites didn't want to live in Belmont Heights and East Tampa.
East Tampa faced challenges in gaining rights to education and voting. Black children were prohibited from being taught by another race until 1916, and the White Municipal Party illegally denied black community members voting until 1953. With little access to funding and political power, the struggles East Tampa faced, such as poverty and poor infrastructure, were overlooked. Despite these discriminatory practices, East Tampa was able to create a flourishing main street of black-owned businesses and came to be known as a thriving enclave of black life. Residents from the community reflected on their past experiences growing up in East Tampa, and themes of strong community ties, lush green spaces, influential figures, and Little League games were the most cherished memories.
Most of the people in the neighborhood were homeowners. It wasn't a transient community. We knew the neighbors and interacted with the neighbors and attended school with people in that area.
On my block, I had the newspaper publisher, C. Blythe Andrews Jr. Right next to him was a medical doctor, Dr. Jackson. 3 doors down across the street was another medical doctor, C. Blythe Andrews' brother, Dr. William Andrews. 2 medical doctors in my block. We only had maybe 10 in the whole city, and 2 of them lived on my block, black medical doctors in the 60s. A minister of a big church, New Hope Baptist Church, pastor was living on my block. Across the street from him was the president of the Tampa NAACP, the Warren Banfield, who also was the Seventh-day Adventist minister.
Well, this was one of our parks here. We used to come here every Saturday and look at Little League baseball. Mm-hmm. My brother played Little League baseball, so it was really fun here.
They said Rogers Park was the only park at one particular point that black people could attend. And my father was a golfer, and so he played golf at Rogers Park. And even with the 9th grade education, he was successful. He worked for Cargill, Garnier, and he was the supervisor over the entire construction department. And he was very successful, and he retired early at 55. Later, he ran a summer youth program. And I'm very proud of his accomplishments. And he also coached Little League baseball at Belmont Heights Park for 18 years.
The green spaces in East Tampa were used for play areas for children, sources of nourishment, and boundary setting between neighborhoods. Residents enjoyed the native fruit trees that flourished in their backyards, but as the city of East Tampa was economically and politically neglected, the natural flora dwindled.
There were always a lot of fruit trees in our neighborhood, oranges, grapefruit trees, Japanese plums, picking the Japanese plum. Very few people had fences, so you could go in other people's yards, and they knew us. We were not, disruptive and didn't damage anything, and just pull fruit off the trees.
As stated by Miss Beatrice Jolliffe,
I used to have a lot of orange trees in my yard, orange and grapefruit, but they died. I don't have those anymore. But when I came back, my orange trees, my tangerine trees, they were all gone.
Especially behind my home, there was like a wooded area. And that kind of separated the black neighborhood from the white neighborhood, because the further north you went from Cayuga Street, the more whites lived in that area. The blacks were moving in, whites who could afford to were moving out.
Development projects, such as the construction of the I-4 highway, negatively impacted East Tampa's natural environment.
The biggest change that I can remember as far as environment was when I-4 came through East Tampa. This was in the early 60s. So they started tearing down homes, eminent domain. They were buying and tearing down these homes just south of Columbus Drive, where I-4 goes through East Tampa.
Due to the high volume of stormwater retention ponds in the area, Mosquitoes continued to be a significant issue for the residents of East Tampa. The ponds were seen as hazardous bodies of standing water that the community could not fully engage with due to sewage drainage and the presence of mosquitoes. The ponds were also overlooked by the municipal government, and those that could have served as community recreation areas became described as, quote, eyesores to the city.
We had retention ponds, but they were not, none of them were decorated like some of them are now. They were just where a lot of standing water was.
I refuse to stay by ponds and water because during the summer, you're going to pay for it.
How is that?
Mosquitoes. Because they're trying to beat you in, and they're going to push you in the door, the mosquitoes. Yeah. This is Florida, so you have to learn how to adapt.
But I remember that wooded area where Young Middle School is. Right next to that was a drainage ditch, and sewage used to flow into that ditch. You know, it usually had a bad odor. And this drainage ditch was wide open. It wasn't fenced in. I mean, it was really dangerous, not to mention a health hazard, but it was very dangerous. And I'm sure there were people who got sick as a result of living by that ditch where you had that sewage running through it. But we just lived with our environment. We just made the best of it.
Like many communities, East Tampa has undergone significant changes over time. Memories of past and present residents often shift from fondness to aspirations of what could have been. The area has continuously dealt with development issues, and some construction projects have been found to be faulty due to inadequate consideration of previous land use.
And right behind the library, there are some homes that were built relatively recently, maybe 40 years ago. And then they were having problems with the ground being unsettled and the buildings starting to crack and the sidewalks and the driveways cracking. Didn't surprise me because there used to be a lake, you know. But when those people bought that property, they didn't know the history. Anyone who knew the history of that area never would have bought a home there.
According to 53neighborhoodinvestment.org, East Tampa's population declined by 11% from 1990 to 2000, and by the year 2000, 15% of the neighborhood's residential lots were vacant. Over the past 20 years, gentrification has become increasingly prevalent in East Tampa, causing home prices to rise and driving many longtime residents out of the area.
In the mid-1990s, I would say, when I started noticing things changing, when the original owners had either died, most of them had died, or moved on. Most of them lived there until they died.
When I first moved there raising my kids, it was very quiet. The kids, hanged around. I had a basketball goal put up in front of my house. All the kids would come out and play basketball. A lot of time the policeman officer would stop by and get out there and play with the kids. They moving in. They building houses, and new neighbors are moving in. I see new neighbor walking the street.
And now I'm thinking about other areas, my family. I need to buy some property up so that they can have their own place instead of this 3 times the rent.
As it stands right now, there is a lot of building going on in East Tampa, but there is no space for the children to play, because you're having all these new homes, but you don't have any yard space for kids to play.
The community's efforts in collaboration with various organizations have led to the transformation of some stormwater ponds into places for leisure, recreation, and recognition of influential community members. One example is the Clarence Fort Freedom Trail Pond, named after a civil rights activist who led a sit-in protest with students from Middleton and Blake high schools in 1960. This pond was also used for baptisms by local churches in the 1940s. Another pond, Carrington Community Lake, was named after Herbert D. Carrington Sr., a prominent business leader and active community member in East Tampa. The Robert Cole Community Lake was also named after Robert L. Cole Sr., another influential member of the community. Developing the ponds into community spaces has been an ongoing challenge in East Tampa. Currently, the 22nd Street Pond and the Bay Street Pond are being developed. Despite the great push from the city and the Community Redevelopment Agency to redevelop the ponds, some community members have mixed feelings about the ongoing development and its potential effects. As stated by Ruby Gatson in 1985,
we are convinced that the retention pond is not in the best interest in our community. We have spent years maintaining our community. No one will want to live in our area if the city continues to take more and more valuable land for retention ponds.
And while the city of Tampa took the position of naming several of these retention ponds for citizens, as a way of recognizing them, which I think is a good thing. But then if you're not going to maintain them, if you're not going to take care of them, if you're not going to keep them up, if you're not going to make sure that they're an asset to the community and not an eyesore, then you haven't really done what you should have done with these retention ponds.
The history and memories of the residents of East Tampa show the community's resilient efforts to claim and create communal spaces in the area for community activities and leisure. Ongoing community-powered efforts and renewed interest in East Tampa present a unique opportunity to create community-focused and equitable green spaces, including redeveloped stormwater ponds. Despite the many changes to the area over time, the history of East Tampa will continue to be shared through the stories of its residents and important landmarks like the stormwater ponds. East Tampa residents have always been vocal about their concerns and visions for these neighborhoods. By engaging with different projects like the redevelopment of the stormwater ponds and growing healthy 22nd Street, East Tampa residents have a vested interest in the success of the community for themselves and future generations.